a radiogenic production.
Hello, Mark Quinn here again. My time working in local radio in Bray from the late 1970s to the 1990s centred on my passion for interviewing, whether recorded or live. I got to speak with many, many people, all sharing stories or supporting Bray area causes. I suppose I'm fortunate to have kept many reel-to-reel and cassette recordings, which now, thanks to modern audio restoration, we are able to enhance so that we can hear these voices from the past once more. This podcast series largely draws from BLB, or Bray Local Broadcasting, and Horizon Radio, and centres around interviews mostly from the late 1980s and into the early 1990s. I was really lucky to have some great people around me, such as sound mixer Chris Conway, and particularly researcher and producer Elaine Keogh, who managed to source some great guests for me to chat with live on Saturday mornings. Together, our team produced over 50 one-hour episodes of Quinn & Company between 1989 and 1991, and our work was honoured with a 1990 Bray Chamber of Commerce Endeavour Award, a recognition that I still value deeply. So, as we travel back in time, I hope you enjoy listening to these archive interviews. Step back in time with me to Saturday the 13th of October 1990. We're in the studios of Horizon Radio at Prince of Wales Terrace in Bray. In the studio chairs either side of me are two men who in their own unique ways became guardians of Ireland's natural world. On one side, John Wilson. To us in Bray, he was the trusted vet from the Dublin Road, the man who co-founded Brayvet, and who, to some degree, changed the face of animal care in Bray. On the other side, Éamon de Buitléar, the legendary filmmaker and naturalist who grew up in the Dargle Valley in Bray and who had already spent decades bringing the magic of the wild into Irish living rooms with TV programmes like Amuigh Faoin Spéir. When this interview was recorded, both men were at some sort of turning point. Shortly after our chat, John would step away from the daily grind of his clinical practice to become a national star. He'd continue to host RTE's Pet World, becoming a household name and even taking his skills to war-torn Congo with the Irish aid agency GOAL in 2003 to help communities with their livestock. He remained a showman to the end, known for his poetry and magic until his passing away in March 2021. Éamon, meanwhile, never stopped fighting for the environment. In the years that followed this interview, he received honorary degrees for his lifetime service and became a fierce critic of policies that threatened our native forests. He donated his massive archive of film and music to NUI Galway, ensuring his life's work would inspire the next generation. We lost Éamon in January 2013, but his voice and his harmonica still echo through the hills of Wicklow. But before the awards, the national fame and the global travels, they were just two friends sitting in a radio studio in Bray talking about the animals and wildlife that they loved. We'll hear about the Bray of their younger days, about the people who inspired them, and about their lives up to that point. The format of the live show was that I spoke with each guest individually, but the other guest was always welcome to chime in, and they did. So let's go back to October 1990 with Éamon de Buitléar and first, John Wilson.
I was reared on what was probably the nearest dairy farm to what was then Nelson's Pillar. You know, we lived out in the country. And as a young lad, you're in contact with animals all the time. But even when you were going into the city, you were going into the cattle mart, for example, in the North Circular Road, which was the biggest cattle mart in Europe, which was held in the very centre of the city. And you could see animals going up and down, you know, the North Circular Road, heading for the boats. And there were all these piggeries and small dairies in around Ballybock and Fairview and that area. The whole city at that stage was alive with animals. It's been sanitised since, regrettably, but at that stage, people were involved and had things to do and had a meaningful existence caring for animals within the city structure, and regrettably that's all gone.
Indeed.
So I was well used to, brought up with animals, as indeed was everybody. I mean, it wasn't just myself, everybody was.
Was it good fun?
It was, of course. It was a way of life, and you always had something to do and you were never bored. And when you lived on a farm, there was always something to be doing. Indeed, my dear father, who is alive and well and living in Kilcool with my mother, insisted that young lads should never be left idle, and put work in their way and kept them busy at all stages of the day and night. Whenever he saw you standing around, you got something to do.
What sort of things? Come on, tell us.
Well, I mean, there were always calves to be fed. There were always things to be cleaned out. There were always cows to be got in, to be milked, to be counted. And even if he had nothing to do, he'd send you off to count the cattle. That was a great trick. What are you doing there? What are you doing there? Doing nothing. Right, okay, go off up the field there now and count those cattle. And of course, you'd go round the corner and you'd play ball for about 10 or 15 minutes, and you'd come back and you'd say, how many were up there? 15. Go and count them again. So you'd have to get the right answer, So, I mean, it was good. And I think children nowadays who do not have contact with animals, I think, are deprived. And I think one of the great deprivations that children suffer at the moment is not clothing, food, videos, books, education. It's the mere physical fact that they can't actually put their hand on an animal and press it and touch it and feed a sucky calf or have a little baa lamb there, Mm-hmm. I feel strongly about that.
And do you feel strongly about the zoo then, presumably?
Yes, the zoo is a different kettle of fish altogether. I mean, the zoo is there, and initially the zoo was to be a centre of education and learning, and fine, if it fulfills that role, great. But why should we go overboard in trying to preserve the zoo and having so many people coming to the zoo when we can't even get the average child living in an urbanised area able to put their hand and try to milk a cow? So the object should be to try and set up city centre farms of some description, which would give kids the contact with the standard things which exist. A pig. Let them see what a pig looks like, with a litter of bonhams. Okay, you could do it to a small stage within a kind of a pet's corner in the zoo, but you must have hands-on experience. You must actually handle them and feed them and work with them on a day-to-day basis to get the value from it. All
right. Now, that was a perfect background to becoming a veterinary surgeon. Did you always want to be a vet, or how did you become a vet?
I became a vet because my next door neighbour was a most intriguing and interesting man, probably one of the finest brains I've ever met in my life. And you may have met him, Éamon, a man called Noel Taylor. He's dead now, God rest him. Noel Taylor, the founder of Taylor Keith's Mineral Waters Factory.
I knew him, yes.
You knew him well. Well, a most remarkable man. He knew me better than I knew myself. And he, in effect, took me aside one day and said, "You," he had a very gruff way of talking. He said, "You, go on off, put your name down for veterinary. That's what you're to do." And truly I did, and duly I did, and it worked out extremely well.
But there were 5 tough years, I believe, of study.
Yeah, the study is hard, but I think in any situation where you're interested in what you're doing, it becomes an enjoyable pastime, and we certainly enjoyed it. It was a tremendous time.
Did you ever think of giving up throughout? No, it was always you were going to achieve this, and that was.
You were going to achieve it. You might have dropped a little bit along the line, although I didn't. But you would always achieve it, and I mean, it was a career which I've always felt very, very comfortable in, and I've been extremely comfortable in it all my life.
Okay, you graduated in 1962 and worked in Athy in County Kildare for 2 years, and then you moved into a practice in Bray in 1964. So are you a Bray man now, or are you a Blow-in?
I'm a Bray man now.
Are you a Blow-in?
I'm a definite Bray man now, although many people wouldn't consider me to be. But you must realise that in 1964, when I came here, one could do a complete day's testing with cattle, a complete day's work with cattle on the main street of Bray. There would have been somewhere in the region of 200 cattle in yards up and down the main street of Bray. That's from the town hall to Ravenswell gate.
Cattle on the main street in Bray?
Yes, and that's in 1964. Up all those places that are converted into yards and shops and houses now, there were piggeries and there were all kinds of things happening in the actual town itself then at that stage. That's amazing how it's all changed.
So Bray at that time then was very much a country town.
It was a country town. It was a village where the people come into on a Saturday to do the shopping from Callery and from Roundwood, and that's when the big day was. And it amazed me the other day. I went down to buy some sheep wire in the local hardware shop, and they hadn't got sheep wire. Now, Bray, to my view, was reared and it was built on the sheep wire it sold to the lads in the mountains or around the hills here, you know. Isn't it crazy how things have changed?
Do you remember those days, Éamon?
I do. I remember 3 blacksmiths in Bray, and it was terrific to go in and watch Andy Devitt in the main street there with his leather apron, and we used to marvel at the muscles, and Andy was a bit of a show-off, and he loved people who come in and see the horse, and they just used to go in across the path and into this wonderful place where he had this fire, and we used to love getting a chance to blow the fire. But John is right, and I remember sitting on the wall once a month in the Dargle Valley, watching all the cattle and sheep going down to the fair in the Fair Green in Bray. Unfortunately, that's built over now, which it should never have been.
Well, where was that?
That was just opposite the People's Park.
Yes.
Just before you get behind St. Bridget's Terrace.
Yes, yeah.
And it was, I remember, in fact, going myself one morning with the goat, because when I was at school, I had 6 goats, and my brother was fond of gardening, and of course, gardening and goats don't go too well together, and the place was like a desert after a while with the goats. There was a little farm. May Barton had a farm just next door to us, and there was Willie Stampton and then Mary who used to help around the place, and we used to go in and milk cows and go on if you've said to a young fella today or a young one that you went on a hay bogey, they wouldn't even know
what you're talking about.
They wouldn't know what a hay bogey was. And if you said to them, he made a hames of it, they wouldn't know what a hames was. They wouldn't know that it was something off a horse's collar.
Well, I didn't know that either.
There you are, and that you were making a mess of something. You know, I mean, that was something that you use every day of the week if you were talking to somebody.
Do you realise that you and I are becoming dinosaurs?
I do know, and in fact, people think that I have been filming since the end of the Ice Age, which is 10,000 years ago.
Tell me, John, then your practice must have been very much farm practice, was it?
100% farm practice, absolutely.
Touch of the James Herriot.
It was James Herriot up on the hills with all those wonderful people. Glencree, Glencullen, Roundwood, Callery, Newtown, Mount Kennedy, Kilcool, all that area. Fabulous, wonderful, marvellous people. And there was one lady up at the far end of Glencree, and on a wet winter's day, no matter, if you're up that way at all, you always swung up there, up into the little cottage, and there was always homemade soda bread made on a griddle, and there was always a big cup of tea and homemade butter and something like blackberry jam or something, and you'd sit in there beside the fire, and damn the pity you'd want to move. It was great. They're such hospitable people, although around Christmas it was always a bad place to go, because every one of them insisted on pouring out a tumbler of whiskey for you.
Oh yeah.
It was a
So you were serving that whole area from Bray, were you?
Yeah. A wonderful, beautiful area.
And you remember Callery at that time, you'd see teal and snipe, and it was quite the bog there was quite
absolutely
wet.
alive
Would game.
Yeah.
It was absolutely beautiful. It was a wonderful place to go.
Not so now, no?
Well, it's a lovely place to go, but it doesn't have the same wildlife that it used to have at that time. It's closer to Dublin. People have cars that can be out in a short while, and of course it's under far more pressure now with the easy access, as it were. And the place has, of course, been reclaimed and drained, so it's not the damp, wet bogland that it used to be. So that changes the habitat and changes the wildlife as well.
Yes.
You get one species moving out and another species moving in, as it were.
And the others die off, do they?
Well, they don't die off. They
just move elsewhere.
They would go to another area.
Yes.
Eventually, if they don't have a sufficient number of habitats, of course, they will die off. But you get changeabouts as well. You find areas, for instance, I take now, for example, Kilcool as an example. If that whole area is drained, the geese that are feeding there would move on to the fields. The farmer might be reclaiming the land to use, you see, and the geese have never bothered them. Now the geese don't have the same habitat, so they'll come in and graze on his land, and then they're in competition with his cattle. So it's a funny kind of a balance. Things come under pressure as you change habitats. So pressures change. and situations change.
Well, you found yourself, John, changing your practice about 7 years ago. You changed from farm to very much domestic animal.
Correct, and this was a tremendous change for myself, because I had been reared as a farmer's lad. I had spent 20 years involved in farm practice and was intimately involved in it at every level. But the increased urbanisation of the area meant that there was an increasing number of people who required a veterinary service for pets and for companion animals, and we provided this service. And what we discovered was that the thing was growing at such a rate that it became 70% of our time was involved with this and 30% of our time was involved in the farm practice, because the farm end of it was contracting back at an enormous speed with changing patterns of farming and the increase in usage of the plough and what have you.
Are there fewer farms now in that area?
There are fewer farms which were of any significance to me, insofar as when I came here there were somewhere in the region of 150 dairy herds in the area, and they would be down to about 6 now. They're all gone. The 6 units there would be extremely large now.
So it's large farms as opposed to plenty of small, or a few number of large
They've
farms.
receded as well.
They've receded. Look at all the houses that's around. You know?
You remember the Jersey herd in Violet Hill, for
Of course,
instance?
there was a Jersey herd in the middle of Bray here.
We used to go up and see a Jersey bull is a dangerous animal. Some bulls are not dangerous. Some breeds of bulls are not dangerous, but Jerseys, I suppose, John, you would...
They're nasty little lads.
Yeah,
You know?
and we used to be brought up to see this bull. This was a great thrill, but we'd be brought in as well to see this herd of beautiful cattle, because they're really silky looking and quite gentle.
The beige colour. And
There was another beautiful herd of Jerseys there in Jubilee Hall, there where the school, where the Spanish school is now, up there at the top of Old Connor. Do you know Jubilee Hall there on the...
Yes, we used to play.
Hernans had a fabulous, magnificent herd of, quite a large herd of Jerseys there. And then when you went in a little bit further, there was another herd of Jerseys in there in Sandyford, and there was, they were all over the place. There was a herd of Ayrshires up in Fasseroe.
There were lots and lots of horses as well. There were horses on every farm. There were 2 horses next door to us, and of course we would ride the horse up to the field or ride him back, and the milk was delivered by fishers by horse from Enniskerry. The horse would run all the way from Enniskerry to Bray. They would change horses in Bray, then deliver all around Bray.
So it was a mode of transport even in the 60s, yeah?
And I mean, that was a fair run for a horse with a whole load of
milk.
a big load of milk, to run all the way from beyond Enniskerry right down to Sunnybank. The Sunnybank Inn was the dairy, in fact, where they used to bring the milk, and milk would be bought at the dairy by people coming around with their jugs or their cans or whatever. Do you remember that, John?
Well,
that would probably be
they introduced pasteurisation. Yeah, you're going. I do it. So you are the senior member of this grouping here today.
John, thank you.
All right. Tell us a bit about some of the animals you have to tend to. People tend to think of the vet looking after dogs and cats, but obviously there are lots of...
that would constitute the vast amount of my time. But obviously there are a number of people increasingly getting slightly more exotic things. And I mean, the rabbits, the hamsters, the gerbils and this kind of thing, budgies, canaries, these type of things are quite regular now. They do fulfill a very useful need, very useful function. Indeed, one should probably consider in many cases, rather than getting a dog which you will not be able to control and which will behave in an antisocial way, and certainly the kids do need a pet, so why not consider a rabbit? It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
And at this point, I think I should advise parents, please don't buy terrapins for the children.
Oh, definitely not.
And this craze is just about to start here.
Yeah.
Well, why do you say that, Éamon?
They need a lot of looking after, and you can actually get disease from them, because it has to do with dirty water and meat being...
They're basically carnivorous, which means that they have to be fed on meat and stuff. That's the first thing. The second thing is that they're carriers of salmonella. They're not pleasant creatures at all. And unless the diet is very, very well maintained, you will get vitamin C deficiency in them. And you get all kinds of...
They have something like 20,000 cases in America of salmonella each year from pet terrapins.
Yeah.
And the zoo are constantly having terrapins dumped into ponds and that up there by people who find they can't keep them any longer or are fed up with them.
See, the life expectancy of one is 60 years. So if you're getting something, you're taking on a commitment of 60 years to look after this thing, and it grows to the size of a good soup plate. in size.
Is it true that the bigger the area they have to live in, the bigger they grow? Is that correct?
Well, there's a natural size which they will grow to. You can stunt them by various means, and many of them are living in the most inhumane little fluty.
It depends on the amount of feeding they get as well.
Yeah. So your advice, both of you, would be not to
forget about terrapins.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Welcome back to Quinn and Company there. We just heard a promo for Joe Bollard's show, and Joe Bollard's show on BLB, the old radio station here in Bray, was where you got your first access to the airwaves, John, wasn't it?
Indeed it was. And I must say, Joe and I got on extremely well down here. Joe is a most remarkable person and an interviewer, and we got on extremely well.
What sort of things were you doing?
Well, what we did was, I used to come down here every day and wondering as you come in the door what you were going to talk about. And as I'd kind of sit down, we'd kind of, some subject would cross and we'd take it from there, and we had a most marvellous time for quite a long time. I think we were at it for well over a year. Then I don't know what happened, but I received an invitation or a request wanting to know would I go on Gay Byrne as the vet on that for a spell, and I did that.
You were sort of answering people's queries.
Yes, the questions that people would ring in or phone in or write in, and we'd answer them on air. The format was exactly the same with Joe here as it was with Gay Byrne.
Right.
And that went extremely well. I mean, we got a national coverage for it. Many people still recount listening to it.
Indeed.
And from that then, Philip Kampf was the producer of the Gay Byrne show at that stage, a very young and talented and hard-working young man. And he persuaded me that we should go and make a television programme. And I said, well, fine, sure. I mean, I've known nothing about television, but sure, we'll give it a lash anyway. Yeah. So we did. We made one at weekends. I think you were involved at the early stages in that as well, weren't you?
Wearing another hat, yes, I was.
Another hat. So there we are. We're all here together. This is, a
reunion.
The media business. So, as you know, we went off and we made a promo, and that was brought into RTE, who looked at it and said, yeah, that's grand. Now give us 6, which we did. And then they come back and said, now give us 10. So which we did, and that was a total of 16 programmes broadcast over 2 seasons on television. Now the good news is that Channel 4 have bought the programmes at a very bargain giveaway price, and I can assure you that one does not make any money from what you get from Channel 4. And they're going to be broadcast twice a week for 10 weeks starting on the 18th of November.
That's great.
So it'll be going out, I think, very early on a Sunday morning and at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Basically what we did was we took a crew to the average person who had an animal of some description or a pet or had an animal story to say, and we travelled the length and breadth of Ireland, and we just sat down in people's houses or in their farms or wherever it was, and we just had a chat and a bit of a yap about it and had a look at their animals and went around. And it's more about people and their animals than about animals specifically. It's the interrelationship, this incredibly beautiful, wonderful relationship which exists between people and animals.
I remember one man who had a sheepdog, is that right? He was a real hard man, wasn't he? But his relationship with the dog was almost a love, really, wasn't it?
This is an actual piece. The people in TV Times were ringing me because they got the initial run of this to have a look at it over there, and they were impressed by this as well. What it basically was we went with a television crew to Achill Islands, where the wind whips in, and the men down there have to be tough. Now, I mean, you don't live out on Achill as a sheep farmer without being exposed to the elements and have to have a fair, tough approach to life. And here was this man, when his dog got injured, he felt as emotional about it as any person living anywhere. It's immaterial where you are. The same emotional feelings came through with him, and you think, hardened by his environment, that he would have felt differently. And the next person we took was Lady Hempel, who was a lady of the manor, whose little old dog, a kind of a cross between an alligator and a Jack Russell who'd eat the arms off you, died at a very old age. And she was absolutely upset and deeply, deeply upset about the loss of her little dog. And she was prepared to talk to us on television about how she felt. And it was absolutely riveting television. And indeed, I would say that it's a very, very delicate subject, extremely delicate, and people are highly emotional and highly charged about the whole thing. And I think we covered that one particular subject as well as it could have been done. I'm extremely pleased with that. And there has been a lot of feedback from it, and people phoned and rang and letters saying, look, I felt exactly the same way, and I never knew that, that's the way I feel. And everybody was telling me I was a fool when the dog died, and I was crying and I felt upset about it.
Actually, you can get another one.
You can get another one and replace it and this kind of carry on. But they did feel very badly about it. We managed to get that. Look, you're not the only one. This has happened before, and it's a universal thing.
It's just like losing one of the family if you've had a dog for a long time, isn't it?
Yeah,
of course,
I guarantee you. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just getting back to your own family, John. You met your wife Betty in Portlaoise, I understand.
That's right. As a student, you had to go seeing practice to the various vets, and I was down with Jim Tyrrell in Portlaoise, and driving along with the other local vet down there, I espied this fine-looking young one walking down the side of the main street in Portlaoise, and I duly inquired, "Who's the one?" And I was told that I wasn't going to be introduced, that she was a nice girl. But I prevailed. And, here we are.
Here you are, yes.
A long number of years later. It's
seven
amazing.
Children later as well.
7 children later, just from looking out the window of a car. So if you're travelling around in a car, make sure you keep your eyes closed.
Or eyes on the road, as the case may be. One of those children, I'm just curious about this. One of your children has Down syndrome. Is a Down syndrome child, Dan.
Dan.
Was that difficult to cope with?
He's a difficult child to rear. I mean, all children are difficult to rear in some way, and he's slightly more difficult because of the fact that he gets respiratory infections and because he gets ear problems and what have you. But other than that, each child is an individual in its own right, and we have children who range from the extremely bright with very, very good academic abilities right down to Dan, who I'm afraid will have extremely limited academic abilities, and they're everywhere in between. So, I mean, he's just an individual in his own right, with his own distinctive, destructive personality and an outrageous sense of humour, and a fabulous little character who is great company and great fun.
Can you remember when you discovered that he had Down syndrome, how you felt?
When he was born, I mean, Betty spotted it within 3 seconds. I'm just quite philosophical about it. It took me about, a few minutes to realise what the situation was. And it's interesting that when a special child or a handicapped child or anything is born, the medical profession are tremendously helpful and they do everything they possibly can. But they do tend to give you information in the form of statistics. In other words, we must tell you that this is a Down syndrome. So you ask, okay, tell me a bit about it. And they say, well, the likelihood is that the IQ level will only be that, and you may have cardiac problems, and you may have this, and you may have that, and you may have this, and you may have that. And they will give you factually and absolutely correctly the type of problems that you're likely to have. And you can't fault that. But if you take any other woman having a baby, she's allowed to believe that her child is going to be a king or a queen. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be everything that one could ever ask for of a child. And they never will, to a normal birth, would kind of your child tell the mother. Now, what I want to tell you at this stage is the likelihood is that a high percentage of these children end up as drug addicts or as alcoholics or wife beaters or end up in Mountjoy jail or die of AIDS, or you're allowed to dream. You're allowed to bask in the
good side.
In the good side of it.
Yes.
And the potential is only for good. Whereas if you have a handicapped child or a special child of anything, you get the statistics and you're not allowed to dream. You have to take the facts. And loaded with this kind of information, I went to a friend of mine, whose name I'll mention actually, Joe Doyle, down here in Bray. And Joe has a Down syndrome baby as well. Miriam, who's, she's in her 20s now. And I simply went to Joe and said, hey, Joe, do you hear, we have a Down syndrome baby. And he said, well, so what? What's your problem? And strange enough, that's simply to say that, what's your problem? You've no problem. that put the whole thing into perspective. We have no problem. We've had no problems other than problems that you can solve. And it's not a problem. And indeed, I would say he has been the source of the greatest amusement and gas and fun to us of any of the children, without any shadow of doubt. A total rogue, but a great sport.
All right. And with John Wilson and Éamon de Buitléar. And Éamon, you've been sitting quietly there listening to John.
I'm just fascinated by John's talk. I could listen to him all day. I don't have to say anything.
Well, I'd like you to say a few words. I said at the beginning of the programme that John Wilson and yourself had many things in common. One of the things is coming from a large family, although you weren't brought up on a farm. You must have had...
there was one next door. There was one
next door. So you had closeness to animals from early on.
I did, and I kept guinea pigs, bred guinea pigs and showed guinea pigs. I remember being at school and a few of us got together and formed a club, and we called it the RMBG Club, the Rabbit Mouse. Rabbit, mouse and guinea pig. And then there was the Fur and Feather, which was, if you remember, old man McGanity, who lived on the Dublin Road, and he was a great inspiration to me because he had, I thought it was only fantastic, he had aviaries of birds, and then he had guinea pigs, and he had rabbits, and this competition, or yes, it was a competition. The show, in fact, it was called the Fur and Feather Show. It was held in the Mansion House every year, and they would bring across judges from England. And on the Saturday morning, nobody would be allowed in. These white-coated judges, which I would see through the keyhole. I'd be peeking in through the keyhole to see if my guinea pig was doing any good, if it was getting on. And it felt so important bringing in a guinea pig. You know, there would be people in there with rabbits, which would be very, very valuable, in fact. And of course, there would be birds as well. But they had breeds of rabbits that you don't see here now. They'd have Rex ermine rabbits, which had fur, it was like velvet. And they had them in greys and beautiful kind of bluish greys and whites and almost a pinkish colour. And they would have Dutch rabbits, and they would have Angors, and they would have all sorts of breeds. And then there would be the guinea pigs, and then there would be a class for mice and canaries and budgerigars. And it was a terrific occasion. And I was breeding guinea pigs just for fun and for pocket money. And I used to go up to the zoo to sell my guinea pigs to make some money. So there was that element. And then, of course, the farm next door. Although it was only a small farm, and then there was the river, of course, just outside the window,
the Dargle River,
where we spent every minute that we had. In fact, John was saying about being outside and being told get going and do something. We were never bored. I mean, when I hear children now saying, I'm bored, we hadn't got that word in our vocabulary, in fact.
It really makes me annoyed. It's one of the few expressions that children use that make me really annoyed.
Yeah, drive you crazy. But I remember we weren't allowed inside. If it wasn't lashing rain, we were not allowed inside the door. As soon as we opened the door, get out! You know, out in the garden, because if you could imagine a house which, when we were starting off anyway, we certainly had no running water inside. There was running water outside, and the toilet was outside. There was no bathroom inside. And a crowd of, there were 4 boys, and they weren't exactly gentle boys. And you can imagine 4 of those guys in the house, and there were 3 girls. You know, there were 4 boys and 3 girls. And my father was in the army and was away from home most of the time. So it was my mother's job to look after this pack of harem scarums, and it was in her own interest to have her territory to work on without you
under her feet,
our invasion.
Yeah.
So we were outside. There was loads of room. The reason they came to live just outside Bray was because there was loads of room. There was the river. We could go out in the river and we could play in the river, play in the garden. And I had a kind of a shanty town up the other end of the garden with all these little houses for which I made myself for the guinea pigs and so forth. So we always had something to do. Always had something to do. You
were educated in Blackrock College.
That's
and
right.
After you left school, you worked in a series of exclusive tackle shops. Was that by design? Did you have obviously had an interest in fishing?
Well, yes. I could make rods, I could make fishing flies, and I had fished from the time I was 5, and I felt I would have liked to have had something outdoors. I would have loved to have worked outdoors. And it was very difficult to get work at that time. The situation was far, far worse than it is today.
Really?
Oh, far worse. I went in and I said, well, now, if I could get a job in a fishing tackle shop, I can make rods, I tie casts, I can make flies. I picked the best one. I went into Garnis and Keegan's, which was a real upmarket fishing tackle shop at that time. It was in Parliament Street, and I didn't know that the guy who was working behind the counter had been sacked the day before for pinching fishing tackle. so I just happened to come in at the right time, and I just asked Dick Harris, who was a very famous biologist. He's an entomologist. An entomologist is a person who studies insects, and he wrote a classic book called The Fly Fisher's Entomology. And Dick Harris was not there at the time, so I came back. I think it was 4 times I came back, and eventually I got him. And I asked him if there was a job, and the first thing he said to me was, how did you know there was a job going? Yeah. So I didn't know, but I'd like a job here if I could have one. So he got me to tie up some casts, more a way of getting out of the job himself, because some customer had asked him to put flies on casts and he had something else to do rather than a test for me. So I tied up. There was no bother to me to tie up the casts, and he talked to me for quite a time, and then he told me to come in on Monday and start. So I was absolutely delighted for £3.10 to start in Garnis and Keegan's.
You moved on then and became a bit of an entrepreneur in your own way.
Well, I felt
with your own pet shop, wasn't it?
I felt after 3 years that I should move on. I didn't know what to do. I was in a job for 3 years, and I felt that was long enough. I wasn't really getting anywhere. I knew I wasn't going to oust Dick Harris out of his job. He was the manager. There was no hope of my becoming the manager of the place. And I got to the point where I felt that I'd take any job, and I took one of the most, I suppose it's the worst kind of job that one could ever ask for. Somebody offered me a job of selling paper. Now, going around selling paper in Dublin, paper bags and paper sheets, and it was terrible. I mean, you'd walk your feet off, and trying to sell paper to, for instance, a place like Cleary's, you wouldn't have a hope, because the real smart guys who knew the ropes might give the storeman a few bob, or whoever it was in charge at the time, who was in charge of buying paper. And this fellow would come along with a case with a few old paper bags of samples and was trying to sell back. Yeah, no hope. You'd sell a bit here and a bit there. And some of the shopkeepers were terrible. I mean, you'd crawl in the middle and you'd start talking when there'd be a customer talking to them, not knowing that you should wait until the shop had cleared out. And you might be waiting until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, having arrived in the morning. And I mean, you'd come in, he'd wipe the floor with you. Some of the shopkeepers, it was desperate. It was a good lesson, I suppose. And then I went from that to working in a biscuit factory up in Santry. I used to get a first
Famer biscuits, was it?
Yeah,
Frankie and Andy Morrissey.
That's right. I knew Andy Morrissey. That's how my mother knew him. That's how I got the job.
Right.
So I went up to Famer. I used to get the 7 o'clock bus from Bray. With me piece of steak in my bag to fry it up in Famer at lunchtime. My mother said that I got fat, in fact, on that particular job. And I mean, it was first thing in the morning, then coming back in the evening, and it was quite late. You'd be jaded coming all that distance.
Of course,
back,
yeah.
Yes. Because you had to get another bus when you got into Dublin. You'd have to get the bus out to Santry and then come back again. And I remember at that time you could leave your bicycle at Sunnybank, and it would be there when you'd come back. No lock or anything on it. In fact, I went off down to Connemara for a holiday and came back after a fortnight, and the bike was still at the Sunnybank.
You certainly couldn't do that now anyway.
Somebody would argue, you see, some people would argue, well, everybody had a bike at that time, they wouldn't want you a bike. And then I went into, I decided to start my own fishing tackle shop. So I started my own fishing tackle shop, and I didn't really have much capital. I borrowed £80 and bought whatever I could and had this shop in Parnell Street. And, I emptied my fishing tackle bag, as it were, onto the counter. But I advertised for repairs, that this would be something that you wouldn't have to put a lot of money into, and wouldn't have a lot of investment, and you could repair and maybe run down the road to a wholesaler's and buy whatever you wanted whenever you got the order. You'd always be telling people to come back in the afternoon, that you had to go down to the store,
Yeah.
So then when September came along, I knew that the fishing tackle would be coming to an end, that people wouldn't be fishing, and that winter, having the experience of working in Garnis and Keegan's, I knew that the winter would be a lean time.
Yes.
So I decided that, well, I'd have to get something else. So I bought a couple of canaries. So I put the 2 canaries in the window, and because in the afternoon they were gone, they were sold. And then I went down and bought a few more, and then I bought a few budgies, and there was a budgie craze on at that time. Everybody was anxious to buy a budgie so that the budgie would talk. You see, there was a talking budgie craze on. So I
Do they talk?
budgies.
They don't talk, do they?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
You can. If you have one budgie, not if you have 2, you must have only one.
Oh, I see.
And you keep talking to it. I mean, you spend all your day talking to it, but eventually it does talk if you get them young enough, and if you have the right disposition, and if you're patient enough and keep repeating the same sentence to them. So that went, and I used to get animals, and I used to try and make the thing exciting by taking in a different animal every week, so that people would be actually coming down to the shop to see what
was the new animal of the week.
Yeah, what is the new animal of the week? The day I opened that pet shop, I was offered a job in Healy's of Dame Street, which was another upmarket fishing tackle shop which doesn't exist today. And it was on a par with Garnis and Keegan's. They had the agency for Hardy's of Annick, the famous fishing tackle makers. And I got a phone call from the managing director on the day that I opened, and I said, well, I've opened my own shop, I'm sorry. 3 years later, duty came on furniture and cages, and people were opening pet shops such as Uncle George, and they were bringing in a ton of seed at a time, buying their seed by the ton. I was running down to Spratt's and buying it by the half stone and the stone, and trying to sell it in competition with these guys. Now, as soon as they start to arrive on the scene, of course, the business began to go down a bit, and I said, I better get out of here before I go completely broke. So I rang up Healy's, I rang up the managing director and asked him if that job was still going that he had offered me 3 years before. And he said, it is, you can have it.
Oh, very good.
So I went into Healy's, and it was in Healy's that I met the director of music in Radio Éireann, who was Fachno Honrachain, and he asked me would I be interested in doing a series of radio programmes. So that was the beginning of it, that I actually started in radio doing music programmes because I was interested in traditional music, and it went from there to television coming on the scene in 1961, and I went into television in 1962 doing spots in environmental programmes. It was actually in a magazine programme. I did an environmental spot in a magazine programme, and from that I was asked would I be interested in doing a series on traditional music, and I suggested one on wildlife, and that was it. And then eventually it came to the situation where I had to make a choice whether I would leave Healy's and go in full time into television, although I only had a contract for X number of programmes, but I felt that I could do it. So I left Healy's, and I've been making films ever since. Amuigh Faoin Spéir was a programme which was entirely in studio. Having had a pet shop, I knew everybody in Dublin who had a pet, so I could borrow the pets for the morning of the recording and bring them into studio. And we had
sounds familiar, John.
And, I mean, some of these would be aviary bred native birds and so forth. I mean, canaries wouldn't have been of much interest to us because it was a wildlife programme, and I was able to borrow things like squirrels and so forth. And I remember one, I won't mention his name, but one producer in particular who had absolutely no sympathy whatsoever for animals. He told the cameraman to open the cage in which the squirrel was, and I said, look, if you open that cage, the squirrel's gone. I don't care. He said, open the cage. I said, you know what's going to happen, so that's all right, I'll take responsibility. So he opened the cage, out flew the squirrel.
This is live on air now, is it?
Well, it was almost live in as much as that when they started the recording they kept it going.
Right.
So I mean, the cameramen, the studio cameras ended up sort of almost lying on their backs with these big heavy cameras, trying to wheel them around the floor and trying to film the squirrel, which was up in the curtains at these drapes that they hang down in the studio, and it was an absolute mayhem, So these kinds of things happened, but we got a great response to the whole series. I had never taken a photograph at that stage, and eventually Amuigh Faoin Spéir, which means out under the sky, was a misnomer, if you like, because we were Stig Faoin Dian, or under the roof. So we felt that we'd have to get out, and we got inserts. I remember there was an objection to us taking any pictures from some of the cameramen in RTE at the time. And this news cameraman was then given the job, he was told, okay, if you're objecting, go out and get us some good footage of house sparrows. We're actually doing a programme on city birds this week, so we want house sparrows. So he was seen in Stephen's Green, crawling in under the seats, throwing crumbs at the sparrows, hoping that he would get shots of them with his little camera. And of course, he never even got near them. He was heard to call the birds something that actually isn't in the Collins Field Guide to the Birds of Britain and Europe. So that was the last objection we ever had. We continued on then, and the filming grew, and we eventually, I took the whole programme out of the stage. See, I was never an RT staff person, although people think I have a pensionable job, but we did do all the work inside, but we took it out eventually, and the whole thing was then delivered in a can, so it lived up to its name in being Amuigh Faoin Spéir, out under the sky.
And that has really developed for you, hasn't it? Because
Well,
you make programmes for the BBC, and you make programmes that are distributed all over the world, don't you?
That's right. The last one I made for the BBC went out in America during St. Patrick's Week, and it went out in Australia and went out in Canada. In fact, I met an Australian filmmaker over at Wildscreen, which is a wildlife Filmmakers Festival, which was on in Bristol last week, and she said to me, we had your film a short while ago out in Australia. I said, this is going to be slow and not many people are going to watch it. My God, the blinking tam ratings. I shut up.
Really? Yeah.
So
what was that on? What was it on?
Well, it was a whole film in Ireland, and the emphasis was on areas abandoned by man and taken over by the animals, and the kind of legends that went with these places, like fairy rings and fairy rots and the old buildings. And in fact, I even got an otter swimming in the pool up at Lord Meads. He must have come from the river, but he was there for a couple of days and then went off. So I was lucky to get a shot of him. You know, and I had pine martens nesting inside a house and using the chimney pot as a front door. So they were nice, unusual shots to get, and I got a very nice sequence of mating stoats and stoats playing and that kind of thing. So it was a sort of a moody, easy kind of a film, tied in with legends and traditions and that kind of thing.
Easy to watch, but I'm sure not easy to shoot. I mean, there's some fascinating sequences you see of, particularly on BBC through David Attenborough and so on.
Animal behaviour films, as John well knows, once you're into animal behaviour, it's a matter of waiting and watching and knowing where to go and when to go, and you don't always get what you're actually looking for. So it does take a tremendous amount of time, which is the reason why RTE wouldn't be in for making too many of those kinds of films, because the amount of time is too long. For a BBC film, for instance, of an hour in the Natural World series, where you have a lot of animal behaviour, the BBC would be budgeting for something like 100 days photography. Now, that doesn't include anything else. It doesn't include editing or scripting or anything else. They would be budgeting for something like 100 days photography.
Which is a lot, is it?
Yeah, those African films would be the same, where you would be getting animal behaviour sequences from lions or leopards or whatever, where you actually have to follow the animal, have to set up your hides, etc., etc. So it takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of patience to do that, and of course, a big budget.
And a lot of luck as well, I imagine.
Yeah, there is luck. There is certainly luck attached to it, and knowing where to be and where not to be, and how to move and how not to move. And that is the thing about, John was talking about children missing out on not being familiar with animals these days. If you bring somebody out from the city and put him into a country area to show him or her something, they don't actually know how to cross the field. They don't know how to approach the side of a lake, how to walk along a river without frightening everything that you see. What I see now with daddies bringing along their children, the very first thing a daddy will do is to start throwing stones into the river or into the sea, and then they wonder why they don't see anything, or to start throwing sticks at a tree once they go into a wood. Whereas if you want to see something, you have to go in very quietly and move very slowly. I often wonder when I'm out walking in Wicklow why I never see any deer, but obviously the deers heard me 10 minutes ago. Well, just remember that if you are upwind of the deer, even if you're absolutely quiet, you will never see them, because they will scent you before you see them, so they're gone. So these are just little things that you know automatically if you're in close association with animals.
John,
do you have much contact with the wildlife world as opposed to domestic animals?
Not really. Obviously, no. It's more the domestic pet.
Well, I can say that John is terrific at coming to attend a wild animal. Whenever I phone John,
we've had badgers badgers and various things.
In the case of badgers, John is most willing when it comes to any animal. And I mean, there's never a question of money because the badger can't pay and nobody owns the badger. So John will just come at a moment's notice. I found him terrific in that way.
All of Ireland has gained so much basking in the reflected glory of the work of Éamon. I think, a man of international stature, not just of Irish stature, but of international stature from Bray, and his work is so widely appreciated throughout the world. I think we're all enriched by what he has done, and I think we should, give credit where credit is due.
Fair enough.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Just on wider issues, Éamon, you're concerned for the environment. Can programs like the ones you produce help educate people? Presumably they can help to educate. And is that something that's uppermost in your mind now when you're making films?
Well, you see, it's impossible. It's impossible to be involved with wildlife or with animals, and to go and make a film about animals or to make a film about the environment without being involved. It's impossible to just if you have an animal that's in trouble, or if you have a situation where a habitat is being lost, and you film it. You can't just go home and forget about it. You just get involved, and people link your name with the environment, link your name with trying to preserve that environment. Just as John is linked with animals, and whenever an animal is sick, they'll automatically think of John because they've seen him treating animals. So it's something that concerns me all the time, and you get so involved in it at times that you could spend the whole day just answering the phone or trying to solve problems here, or even down in Kerry or up in Donegal or in Mayo or whatever, because some area is in trouble, an area of bogland or a particular river or whatever. I did the present series, at least the series that is to go out next, is called Exploring the Landscape, and I did that because I felt that if people knew a little more about their landscape, they would take more care of it, and that was my reason for doing that particular series. So you do get involved in it. You just can't go home and forget about it.
So there it is, from October 1990 on Horizon Radio, Bray. That was an episode of Quinn & Company with me, Mark Quinn, and my guests were John Wilson and Éamon de Buitléar, both of whom have sadly passed away. My thanks to Elaine Keogh, who researched and produced Quinn & Company. And there's more archive interviews available in this series. If you'd like to make contact, our email address is radiogenicproductions@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.